When companies or governments get too greedy, mistakes can be deadly. And the bigger the project, the bigger the fallout. From 160 miles of coastline being coated in oil to a 2,000-foot mushroom cloud that killed 600 people in Texas, I'm Mike with List 25, and join me as we count down the 25 biggest man-made environmental disasters of all time. 25. Cattlegate. 50 years ago, thousands of cattle were found to be full of a chemical called polybrominated biphenyl, or PBB for short. It began with a huge mistake, when a Michigan chemical company sent a batch of the chemical to feed livestock, instead of a nutritional supplement. Farmers began reporting oddities in their cattle, from skin diseases to difficulties with their joints. By the time the Michigan Department of Agriculture made the discovery, around 8 million people had consumed tainted products, and over time they began to feel the effects. These included miscarriages and breast cancer. Today, the real number of people affected is still unknown. 24. Itai-itai disease. A chemical called cadmium was accidentally unleashed onto the Japanese population early last century. The source came from the area of Doñana, where companies had been operating high up in the mountains, mining for silver, copper, and lead. As the chemical leaked into the rivers, it made its way into the drinking water. This gave rise to the Itai-itai disease, which affects the body's bone cells. Studies have found higher rates of pneumonia and renal disease among people suffering. 23. Yokkaichi Asthma. Another outbreak in Japan came from the Mie Prefecture back in the 1960s. Clouds of gray containing sulfur dioxide covered the sky for years, which seeped into the lungs of thousands of people. It was big enough to be classified as the 4 big pollution diseases in the country, with some parts of Japan recording 2.5% of the population suffering from the effects. 22. Hazelwood mine fire. Australia is notorious for its scorching hot temperatures and devastating bushfires. In 2014, a fire was sparked in the Hazelwood mine in Victoria. It took hundreds of firefighters 45 days to put out the flaming mine. Dozens of people were treated for a range of illnesses, and in the following years, hundreds of residents were found to have weakened lungs after tiny toxic particles had entered their bloodstream. The estimated damages were over $100 million, leading the nearby community to push for greater regulation and emergency warning systems. 21. MV Rena Oil Spill. After the MV Rena ship collided with the ground near the Astrolabe Reef in New Zealand and was stranded, the oil began leaking into the water, with extreme weather tilting the ship on its side and eventually snapping the hull in half. A specialized team was brought in to begin pumping the remaining oil from the vessel. However, by the time the operation was completed, over 350 tons had already emptied into the ocean. Immediately after the spill, over 1,300 birds were found coated in oil, dead. Nearby inhabitants of Whiddy Island were starved of their fish stocks, and in total, the incident cost $240 million. 20. Fox River landfill burst. The MV Rena oil spill wasn't the only recent environmental disaster New Zealand has suffered. In 2019, the Fox River was hit by extreme flooding, which washed an enormous amount of waste into the ocean when a landfill burst. It wasn't just plastic either. Much of the waste was made up of toxic materials and metals. 19. Pesticide contamination in Havelock North Water Supply. Staying in New Zealand in 2016, residents of Havelock North were hit by an epidemic when over 5,000 reports of gastroenteritis gripped the town. Dozens of these were so severe that people were hospitalized. After government officials investigated, it was discovered that contaminated drinking water was to blame. Experts believe that nearby flooding had injected the town's water supply with water from a pond full of pesticides. 18. Whiddy Island disaster. Off the coast of Ireland, an oil tanker had a disaster causing more damage than any spilling ever could. In the dead of night, on January 8, 1979, the MV Beetlejuice was sailing from Saudi Arabia to Whiddy Island near Ireland. After arriving and commencing the unloading procedures of the 114,000 tons of oil on board, a bright explosion engulfed the ship, filling the sky with a cloak of thick, black smoke. The initial explosion was followed by a series of smaller ones, enough to generate 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit of heat. 51 people were killed in the incident, in what was one of Ireland's darkest days. 17. Buncefield Oil Depot explosion. Not far south of Ireland, England had its own major blow-up. This one was onshore, though, at a fuel storage facility owned by oil giants Total UK Limited and Texaco. One explosion was sparked by fuel floating through the air, which set off a series of other explosions. The fire burned for over 2 days, and after firefighters worked 24/7 to contain and put out the blaze, no lives were lost. 16. Prestige oil spill. Imagine the weight of 6 Eiffel Towers, all made up of oil, dumped into the ocean. That's what happened in 2002 with Spain's most devastating environmental catastrophe. The Prestige oil tanker was hit by a vicious storm just north of Spain, and in the chaos, a 50-foot hole was punctured into the side of the ship, meaning it was only a matter of time before it sank. After the Portuguese, Spanish, and French all rejected their requests, the Prestige was out of options for places to dock. As it was being towed through the water, leaving an oil trail behind, it broke apart, emptying an estimated 17 million gallons of oil into the water. The cleanup cost €2.5 billion. The captain was arrested, and over 1,200 miles of coastline were coated in thick, deadly black oil. 15. Doñana disaster. In late April 1998, while most residents of the city of Aznalcóllar in southwestern Spain were sleeping, a major dam broke open, allowing around 5 million cubic meters of toxic mine waste to flood into the region's rivers. Zinc, lead, copper, and other heavy metals were carried dozens of miles downstream, heading toward Doñana National Park. Luckily, the government agencies responded quickly to build a temporary dam and stop it from reaching inside the national park. Still, nearby farms, around 10,000 hectares, were poisoned, and recovery will take over 40 years. The company responsible for the disaster deserted all its Spanish mining operations and filed for bankruptcy after the government announced a $45 million fine. 14. AZF chemical plant explosion. Toulouse, southwest France, 2001. A gigantic explosion echoes through the entire city and is heard more than 50 miles away. The incident came just 10 days after the 9/11 attacks in New York, leading to fears that France, too, had been targeted. The source of the explosion was a chemical plant at the company AZF, where nitrogen fertilizer was produced. 300 tons of ammonium nitrate had exploded, cratering more than 20 feet into the ground and obliterating the entire factory. 31 people were killed, thousands injured, and a pedestrian died half a kilometer away from the blast site. More than 1 in 20 nearby school children had hearing issues months after the explosion. On top of that, the toxic minerals in the environment caused long-term damage like skin problems. 13. Ghislenghien gas explosion. Belgium, the neighbor of France, was rocked by an equally catastrophic explosion a few years after the disaster of Toulouse. This one was caused by a gas pipeline that connects Norway to the European mainland. The trigger for the accident was set when workers building a factory in the town of Ghislenghien accidentally scratched the pipeline underground. A team was dispatched to work carefully to fix the exposed area, and weeks after the leak had begun, when the pressure built to unsustainable levels, it exploded into flames that projected hundreds of feet into the air. The intense heat melted nearby infrastructure, generated an earthquake, and sent debris more than 3.5 miles away, while 24 people died and 132 more were injured. 12. Marcinelle mining disaster. At the Bois de Cassia mine in 1956 in the western part of Belgium, a pulley malfunction led to the loss of hundreds of lives. On the morning of August 8th, the mechanism misfired and destroyed electric cables, causing an eruption of flames underground. As the fire rapidly moved through the mine, it mixed with oil from broken pipes. With the only exit blocked, 262 miners were trapped down below. By the time rescuers were able to access the area, all the miners had died from carbon monoxide poisoning. 11. Kymijoki pollution incident. For 44 years, toxic chemicals were silently released into the Finnish river of Kymijoki. The main chemicals were byproducts of bleaching and heating of materials to create pesticides and wood preservatives. One of the knock-on effects is contaminating fish products, making them dangerous to eat. To this day, it isn't known exactly the quantity of chemicals that were leaked in the Kymijoki River. Between 1940 and 1984, around 24,000 tons of wood preservatives were produced. A study found that farmers living close to the river now have a higher risk of developing cancer. 10. Phillips disaster of 1989. When an accident engulfed the Houston Chemical Complex in Pasadena in 1989, it was more than Texas could handle. The facility had been manufacturing a type of plastic used in common food storage containers. During a maintenance check, workers unintentionally allowed 39 tons of gases to escape and travel throughout the facility. As soon as this gas met with a flammable source, it ignited into explosion equivalent to detonating 2.4 tons of TNT. 23 people were killed, hundreds more injured, and debris was projected 6 miles away from the blast site. 9. Kyshtym disaster. The most dangerous weapons in the modern age are by far nuclear ones. Sometimes, though, the danger is in just keeping them safe. After World War II, the Soviet Union had been researching nuclear technology at its newly top-secret facility of the Mayak plant. In 1957, a broken cooling system caused a tank full of liquid nuclear waste to suddenly explode, covering hundreds of miles of land and attaching itself to anything in its path, including buildings, towns, and people. It left a trail of contamination reaching as far as 8,000 miles away. The real numbers of people affected by the radiation have never been released by the Russian government. 8. Tennessee Valley Authority coal ash spill. Coal-fired power is known as dirty power for a reason. It releases huge amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and sometimes the effects are even more immediate. This is a lesson that Tennessee learned the hard way, when the Kingston fossil plant had a major disaster in 2008. 3 days before Christmas, a pond holding ash and water collapsed, spilling 1.1 billion gallons of black sludge over hundreds of acres. The wave drenched the surrounding area with pollutants that contained arsenic, lead, and even radioactive uranium, in the worst spill in US history. Within a decade of the incident, 30 people who had been working at the facility died, leading to a multi-million-dollar lawsuit. 7. The Monongah coal mine explosion. There aren't many places worse to be trapped than at the bottom of a mine shaft. The Industrial Revolution took commercial mining to a scale never before seen, creating thousands of new towns, including in West Virginia, where the Monongah coal mine was built. In 1907, with miners underground working, an unexplained explosion bellowed out through the large network of tunnels, causing the ground to cave in and trap everyone inside. The disaster helped push for greater regulation and protections in mines, but it was too late for the families of the 350 victims of this explosion. 6. Texas City industrial disaster. On April 16, 1947, the port of Texas City was filled with bright-colored smoke. The source was from a fire aboard a French ship that was loading toxic fertilizer. The smoke, which began to appear in the morning, continued blazing for an hour before it erupted, destroying the entire ship and most of the dock. A huge mushroom cloud floated over 2,000 feet into the sky. By the time the dust had settled and the damage had been assessed, it was clear that 600 people had lost their lives, along with thousands of residents left homeless. 5. Martin County coal slurry spill. Martin County, Kentucky was gripped by a mining disaster in 2000 when a coal slurry tank was punctured from underneath, dropping over 1 billion liters of arsenic, mercury, and other toxic chemicals into a network of abandoned coal mines. None of these were sealed, meaning it was released into nearby waterways through the local rivers. Insiders from Massey Energy, the company responsible, claimed that there had been several warnings that an accident was imminent, but that executives had ignored them to cut costs. 4. The 2015 Gold King mine spill. What's the worst mistake you've ever made while at work? Probably nothing compared to what contractors working on the Gold King mine in Colorado did in 2015. A company was brought in to minimize pollution, but while digging out the entrance to the mine, the team miscalculated the water level and unintentionally destroyed a critical plug. Just like pulling the plug in your own bathtub, water rapidly evacuated down the hole. Except instead of down a drain, it spilled out of the mine, blocking the road and making its way into the Animas River. The river transformed into a musty yellow color caused by the excessive amount of iron, copper, and arsenic from the mine. 3. The Brumadinho Dam disaster. Imagine a huge, unstoppable wave rushing straight towards you, and instead of water, it's made out of thick mud, crashing into and flattening anything solid. That's what Brazilians in the town of Brumadinho were faced with in 2019 when a gigantic dam burst, taking with it workers, buildings, houses, and a railway bridge. Many had no time to react as they were eating lunch in the mine's cafeteria, while others were caught in the unrelenting barrage of water flowing downstream. In total, 270 people lost their lives from the tidal wave of mud, with pollution-affected areas more than 70 miles away. The owner and operator of the dam was ordered to pay $7 billion to fully repair all environmental damage. 2. The Upper Big Branch mine disaster. In 2010, the Massey Energy Company was responsible for a catastrophe that left more than 24 people dead. And if that company sounds familiar, it's because I literally just talked about it relating to the Martin County coal spill. That's right, the same company had another disaster less than a decade later in Montcole, West Virginia, and this one was even worse. After methane met with an ignition source at the Upper Big Branch mine, a sudden gush of air was ejected from the tunnels before debris was fired out of the mine. The explosion was so strong it could be heard more than 6 miles away. 29 miners were underground at the time, and all of them lost their lives. 1. The Jilin chemical plant explosions. China is now the biggest chemical manufacturer on the planet. However, this size comes with great risks. In 2005, 6 people died in a blast from the Jilin chemical plant. The government tried to cover up the incident, claiming that the lack of water had been scheduled months earlier for maintenance. Eventually, the gravity of the situation led to information leaking out to national and international media. About 100 tons of pollutant were released into the nearby Songhua and Amur rivers for dozens of miles, all the way to the Sea of Japan, directly affecting millions of residents on the way. So, do you remember any of these? Let me know in the comments below. Also, don't forget to like, share, comment, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and check out our social medias, including my personal ones, links in that description. Now, humans aren't the only reason for disasters on Earth. Did you know that there are lakes that spontaneously explode caused by a buildup of gas under the water's surface? Or how about the fact that melting glaciers are acting, deforming, and changing the shape of our planet? For all that and more, click here to find out 25 unbelievable Earth facts. Although we should really stop having man-made disasters. That'd be great, if I'm being honest. Thanks, corporations.